Hello, my name is Lorie Karnath, and I'm the managing editor of Molecular Frontiers Journal. I have today the great pleasure of speaking with Professor Don Johanson. Professor Johanson is considered as one of the most accomplished scholars in the field of human origins and is the founding director of the Institute of Human Origins, headquartered in Arizona. Professor Johanson's discovery of a skeleton in 1974 would change the way in which mankind viewed themselves. That discovery of a new hominoid became known as Lucy. Welcome, Don.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here with you.
So can we start by you telling us a little bit about this discovery and where Lucy fits on the human tree?
Oh, absolutely. You know, in 1974, I was co-directing an expedition to the northeastern part of Ethiopia, which is known as the Afar Triangle. And it was littered with fossils of all kinds, elephants, rhinos, monkeys, and so on. But what I was really looking for were remains of our human ancestors. I knew that those geological deposits were more than 3 million years old. And if we could find fossils, it would really open up a new window for us into the far distant past. And on November 24th, 1974, I was out on a routine survey looking for fossils that had eroded out of these levels. And I spotted a little piece of arm bone, and it comes absolutely from the elbow right here. And I knew from the anatomy instantly that this was not from a monkey. It wasn't from a antelope or gazelle. And as I kneeled down to look, I could see fragments of a skull and fragments of a jaw. And I realized that this was a human ancestor. It's about 40%. She is about 40% complete. I thought she was a female because the bones were so small, the jaw was so small. And that evening in camp, when we were celebrating, another member of the expedition said, well, Don, if you really think this is a female, why don't you call her Lucy, after Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, a Beatles song that was playing on a tape recorder that evening. And that's how she got her name. We didn't know really who she was, what kind of species she was, or how she fit on the family tree. But by 1978, we realized this was a new species, a real tongue twister, Australopithecus afarensis. And in 1978, at a symposium in Sweden, I postulated that this species was the last common ancestor to two major branches on the human family tree. One of them led to a series of Australopithecus fossils that were species that were really adapted to a vegetarian diet. And they died out about 1 million years ago. But on the other branch, we see that Lucy's species, afarensis, gave rise to our own genus. Our genus is Homo, which is Latin for man. And the earliest evidence we have now for our own genus is about 2.8 million years ago, found by a member of the Institute. And it is substantiating the idea that Lucy gave rise to these two branches, because the fossils at 2.8 million are very interesting because they show some of the anatomy of Lucy's species and some of the anatomy of our own genus. So she sits at a pivotal place on the human family tree, just at the point, interestingly, where there's a major climate change. And everybody's talking about climate change today, but there was a major climate change at that point that was drying up the forests in which those ancestors were very familiar and opening up more bushland and savanna. And some of these early ape men, as they're sometimes called, Australopithecus, ventured out onto that savanna and launched that lineage, which ultimately evolved into all of us, Homo sapiens.
Amazing. And what do you feel that Lucy, this discovery, taught us about ourselves?
Well, there are a number of things that are very clear now. One of them is that every person on the planet is an African. No matter what we look like, no matter where we live, no matter what our language or culture is, if we look deep into our genetic past, and we can now with the marvel of genetic studies, look into the human genome. And in the human genome, there are progenitor genes, genes that are common to Africans, and particularly to Southern Africans. And those genes have been around for a very long time, and we carry those. And we migrated out of Africa several times. The last time was really about 60,000 years ago when we began to populate the world as Homo sapiens. And I think that's very important, that we are as a species united by our past, that we are a species that has this common ancestry, this commonality that goes far beyond the sorts of things that divide people. And we should remember that we are all closely related to one another. Also, what is interesting is we think of how successful a species is. And one of the measures that people use very often is how long they've been around. Dinosaurs were around for hundreds of millions of years. They went extinct. Lucy's species was around for about 1 million years. And people like ourselves who are anatomically and behaviorally modern have probably been around for 150,000 years. So here's a species, Lucy's species, that lived for a very long time, but met extinction. And it really tickles our mind to think about whether or not we as a species that have been around for only about 1/5 of the time that Lucy has been, we think that we will last forever. Is there a message in there for us that we have to be very careful about ourselves, about our environment, so that we don't actually bring about our own extinction?
Well, we'll get into that in a minute, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts. But first, what I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about is, how would you say, how is it that we evolved in a relatively short amount of time into a species that basically controls all of life on the planet?
Well, what happened about 3 million years ago, this is a scenario that I've been working on actually recently, is with this climate change, there were numerous opportunities. One of them on the African savanna was to maybe begin eating an entirely new food source, which was high in protein. Our brains, of course, are the pinnacle of our adaptation. I mean, we have brains that are larger and more complex than any other species in the known universe. And this is, of course, how we adapt to changes that come our way. And I think that in order to include meat in your diet, you have to use some level of intelligence, however that's defined. As vegetarians, it doesn't take a lot of brain power to grab a piece of fruit or run down a blade of grass. But if you're scavenging carnivore kills in this new environment after your ancestors had lived for so long in forests where there were very few carnivores, food was easily available, you're now really being challenged. And those individuals who could make a living on the open savanna, intelligence was selected for. And the brain of Lucy was, probably less than the size of an orange. Ours is, much, much larger. And natural selection selected for larger brains because those individuals who could make a better living and could live longer and feed their offspring were the ones that left more genes in future populations. And over time, there was this strong selection for larger brains, I think based on specifically dietary change. But ultimately, we see that groups of hunters, for example, need to have planning, they need to have good communication, they need to have good weaponry, they need to have a good strategy. And there was a selection for social behavior as well. So I think at the beginning, there was an interaction between the early human ancestors and their change in diet and their adaptation to a new environment. And then as we began to live in much more complex societies, there was strong selection for intelligence to live in those complicated relationships.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. When you think about Lucy and those that came before her and even after her, they had a much stronger connection to nature, the way they had to live, et cetera, as compared to ourselves. Even so, is there something that connects us to nature that transcends both time and distance in modern man, would you say? Do we have, do we carry part of that with us?
Well, I would certainly say so. And I think this is one of the problems that we face. We tend to think that we're sort of beyond nature, that we're above nature. Anthropologists have sometimes called it super organic, beyond biology. And we tend to forget that it was really the natural world through the process of evolution and natural selection that we evolved. And I think there's deep-seated in our genetics this connection to the natural world. And one can see this very clearly when we spend time close to nature, when we sit around a campfire and tell stories, when we go out and look at the stars, like the ones that are behind you. We are in awe of the universe. And I think that this disconnect from the natural world has brought about inconsistency in how we interact with that world. And to me, it's very, very important that we sort of, and I've said it before, reinvent a reverence for the natural world and not treat it the way we treat it. I see nature as our creator. I think that people who are deeply religious, whatever that religion is, and have some image or some particular belief in a creator would not want to treat their creator the way we are treating our creator on this planet, nature. But all of us have this, we go to the beach in the summer, we climb mountains, we ski down slopes, we play golf. People who are out playing golf are back out in nature. And at that time, you feel a calmness that you don't feel when you're in a crowded city, for example, because you reconnect with the natural world.
Well, you have often spoken of sort of the issues with living in a modern city and still having our brains operate in many respects with a Stone Age mind. And how do we overcome, if that's the case, how do we overcome some of these challenges and issues that might bring about?
Yes, if we look at the record for a deep human history, we lived in very natural surroundings at a time when there was clean air, when there was clean water, when there was food available, when there was space to live. And we lived as hunter-gatherers right up to about 10, 12,000 years ago when we began to settle down. And genetically, we were crafted by natural selection to live in a natural world. And today, very quickly, we have moved out of that natural world. And genetically, we are still, I think, designed to be living on those open savannas or those bushlands or whatever. And that living in these cities today is very stressful for us. How we overcome this is sometimes through meditation, sometimes to taking time out to return to nature. And today, if climate changes, and it got very cold in Europe, we're certainly not going to be growing fir, but we will culturally, turn up the heat or so on. We have this incredible capacity today to make choices that no other animals had in the prehistory of this planet. And it is my hope that if we understand our connectedness with the natural world, our connectedness to our past as a common species, that we might be encouraged to face this dilemma with a more responsible attitude to looking after the natural world.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question. So there are many who are obviously very concerned about what's going on in the planet today and how quickly things are changing. So what do you suggest is the most successful path towards preserving the natural world and guard these very ecosystems that continue to play a crucial role in our survival on the planet?
Well, you know, I'm a person who deals with historical matters, prehistorical matters. I don't have a solution for how we do this, but we do have indications that during this period of COVID, when human behavior, human activity was significantly reduced, we saw places where animals that were acting abnormally, for example, have come back to very quickly, over 2 years or so, to living in a natural environment. Whales, for example, with the reduction of ships carrying huge cargoes and making lots of noise and disturbing them. And whales, of course, are very sensitive to these sorts of things. That there are more whales. Whales are, as indicated in a piece I saw recently by Attenborough, the offspring don't have to stay that close to the mother out of fear. They can wander further. We see environments where the air is much clearer, much cleaner, with the great reduction of traffic. So I think that we have to very carefully look at what's happened over the last couple of years and see what changes have been made because of COVID and how we can incorporate changes in our behavior to reduce air pollution, to reduce water pollution, to reduce the things that are essential for life on this planet, not just ourselves, but all life. Of course, nature appears to be very resilient. It seems to respond very quickly to these things. But we have to make an intense effort to plant more trees, to be careful with our water, to be careful with our air, and so on, in ways that you know, many experts are talking to us about this and what changes we need to make. And we need to make them now. We need to make them on a global theater, because doing it in an isolated place is not going to help. But it's imperative that we now embrace this obligation to the planet Earth. There's no place else to move to. This is it. And if we destroy this, we do know that without nature, there will be no humans. Without humans, there will be lots of nature. And we have to come to a balance and respect the natural world and do what we can to assist it, to continue to have it flourish so that we can all live on this wonderful planet.
Well, you have spoken often about how quickly the biological balance has changed. And for quite a long time, humans and domesticated animals represented a tiny percentage of the planet, whereas today there is something like 96%. So even if we start doing things where we are allocating resources better and not using them so wantedly, how do we compensate for that huge shift in the balance overall of humans versus nature?
Well, it's a topic that you know, was not very popular to talk about, but the planet has almost too many people, and I've discussed this with a number of people. We have to limit human populations. That's very, very difficult to find a solution for that, because eventually I think we will have so many people on the planet that there will be a catastrophic collapse. And that catastrophic collapse, as we know, with what's happening now with climate change, with rising sea levels, with lack of clean water or clean air, that it generates an enormous amount of animosity between people. And we've got to spread the word that we just simply cannot, you know, we're the only animal more or less on the planet that's out of reproductive control. All other animals have some constraint on the number of offspring they can leave that can live in an environment. And I think overpopulation, as you know, my friend Paul Ehrlich many years ago when he wrote The Population Bomb has been talking about, that the more people there are, the more difficult it is for the natural world to keep up with the demands of bigger and bigger populations. There are countries around the world, some European countries, where population growth is either zero or even declining. Maybe this is part of the solution, but what we need to do more than anything is to raise the consciousness of people around the world that this is not something we're talking about for thousands of years from now. This is at our doorstep. It is happening right now as we are talking. We are just depleting the oceans. We have to show some level of restraint and some level of you know, figuring out how to keep populations in check. But that has great philosophical and political implications. It's not a popular thing to talk about, but certainly we are a species that is that is out of control in terms of how fast we have populated this planet by just overpopulation.
Well, you spoke early on at the beginning of our talk in how we got from Lucy to ourselves today, and that part of that was due to the unprecedented cooperation amongst peoples at the time. So if you think about that and the fact, you know, that we can communicate via language and some of the other things that you have described make humans very different, maybe those same traits that brought us to here can take us to the next step towards a better future. If you don't mind letting us know what you think about that possibility.
Well, in many ways, I'm optimistic about the upcoming generation, the younger generation on this planet, because they are inheriting a disaster from us, and they are realizing how important it is for us to make tremendous changes. And they will be in positions where they can make a difference. I remember when we met in Stockholm, and there was a young man I met who had a pressing question. He had been invited to go to Australia for the summer to study, and he would have to take an airplane. And he said, I do not want to pollute the air by taking an airplane to go there. I really am deeply involved with conservation, and should I go or shouldn't I go? So this crops up in lectures I give and people I meet and discussions I have with my grandchildren and so on, that they are looking towards a time when they will have a bigger say in trying to find solutions to these global issues that are facing the very existence of our own species.
Well, I think we've seen with some of the conferences that we've put together and that you've attended that younger people are very much more informed than some of the older people about what is going on. And they're, I assume by that you're speaking about that they'll be in a position to change, meaning that they can vote and politically try to sway leaders to go in a certain direction. But I think that we all can be agents of change at every level. And I think we all have a responsibility, as you spoke about, and I want to call on that unprecedented cooperation, that we all work together, because many who will have to deal with the problem, many of the younger people, were not the cause. But as we all learn to do things like drive cars and turn on air conditioning and all that, we must all work together to find ways that we don't use up so many resources at every age. And I think it has to be a group cooperation will be the only way forward.
Well, absolutely. I mean, within the last 10 years or so, we've seen a real interest in schools of sustainability that are looking at ways in which we can sustain our way of life by looking carefully at the damage that we're doing. And so there's an awareness, and the younger generation, those who are in high school or just going to university or whatever, are made aware of this through, science has never been more available, but there's never been so much resistance to it, which is an interesting quandary and an interesting sort of development to talk about. Why is it that nobody complained when they were taking their polio vaccine, and now people are complaining about taking obviously something that will prevent you from getting COVID and dying? So education is obviously the most important aspect of this, and it is education that must be brought, I think, not only to privileged countries where we have the internet, where we have education, where we have an economy that allows us to live the lifestyle of having a shower every day, and so on. But it has to be brought to people in the countryside, people in second and third world countries. I work in Africa. People I know, particularly in Kenya and Tanzania and other places, tribal peoples who are seeing that they can make a difference by conserving water and using a different way to deliver water, or not using fertilizers that are damaging to the environment. And these are people who are speaking out, and those are the people really need to embrace with us this passion we have for protecting our environments. As I say, we need to be better ancestors to our descendants, and yet those descendants are going to have to work hard. But as long as we are here, and as long as we have the most creative brain that we know of in the universe, there is hope that we can make some of these changes.
I agree. So you were speaking of people that you work with in Africa, saying that they can see how to use resources better, et cetera. Of course, it is partly education, but do you think in this particular case, you're describing people who are closer to nature and have a better understanding than somebody living in a tall building in the middle of a city? Is that part of it also?
That's a very good point. I think you're right. There are people who live in high rises in some of these incredible cities that we've built, like New York or Singapore or Los Angeles or wherever. They never think about where the food comes from in their local stores. They would not be able to grow those crops. And so we have a lot to learn from the people who are living close to nature, and they see on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a yearly basis, how negatively we or they have impacted the environment around themselves. Why is Ethiopia planting tens of millions of trees? Because they've chopped all those trees down and made charcoal of them. And they realize that this is added not only to air pollution, but it is also added to problems of erosion and degradation of the landscape, and they're running out of places to plant crops. So there is something very interesting, I think, for both people who live close to nature and those of us who don't live close to nature, to spend time together and to exchange ideas of how best to do this. And of course, economics plays a great role. America has enormous concentration of wealth. Some of these people are leading the way. Some of them are contributing vast amounts of money to try to find solutions to various problems. But others are not. And I think the idea of giving rather than taking, and moving from not what I want, but what I need, is very important. I live in California at the moment. In our showers, we have buckets because we have a tremendous water shortage here. It's that, 2 buckets a day that I use to water trees in my front yard, but everybody on the block here is beginning to embrace that, and that begins to make a major difference. I lived in Arizona for years. You don't plant lawns in the front of your house. You plant desert plants, which are used to living in a dry environment. So I think that that there are lessons we can learn about how to approach some of these issues, not just from the scientists and scholars and specialists and universities, but from people who actually live close to nature today.
You're advocating an education, but an education always within the context of nature, that's
Yes.
how we might be able to
Yes.
move forward and actually improve the way things are at present. So let me ask you this: if you're a student now going to school and have to make choices about which area to study, what would you think would be a good background for your future?
Well, I know at Arizona State University, where I have a professorship, some of the fastest growing programs are like the School of Sustainability. And there are lots of students enrolling because they feel that this will give them a background in which they can make a difference in helping the natural world. I certainly think that the School of Sustainability, of course, very important. Conservation is very important. And it's as I said earlier, not just for Americans or Europeans, but and Arizona State's very good about this, about bringing students in, international students, and training them, and they go back home with new ideas. So, my passion from being a young teenager has been to understand our place in nature, to understand where we come from, who our ancestors were, a marvelous story of biological evolution over the last 7 million years. Very difficult for me to really think of what I would do differently if I were going to university today. But I certainly would be very interested in trying to learn more about how to develop sustainability on this planet.
Mm-hmm. And as we're speaking about all the changes in the natural world and climate crisis, et cetera, you had said that you didn't think that we were going to grow fur anytime soon, but how do you see humans evolving? What will be their evolution going forward that you can see potentially happening?
Well, certainly, I don't think we're going to go big brains or big skulls and so on and so forth. I think the changes we're going to be looking at are cultural changes, social changes, ways that we interact with one another, and information exchange and so on. I think that biologically, we're probably not going to evolve very quickly or very differently, because we have this buffer zone, which is called culture, that intervenes and allows us to solve so many problems. As I've said before, you have to be separated and put into an entirely new environment for natural selection to work on all of the new conditions in which you live. And that would involve very long space travel away from the planet. But, you know, the great thing about predicting the future is you're not going to be around to know if you're right or wrong. But certainly the world that we live in today is a world that we would like to continue to live in. If we don't make these changes, that's a world that I think people will not want to live in, and it will be filled with stress and conflict and territoriality, and not be a very nice place for people to live. So as an anthropologist, I don't like to predict what's going to happen in 100,000 years if we're still here or not. I don't know.
Okay, well, thank you. Before we end the interview, I know you have some very exciting news about how Lucy is being commemorated in the near term. Do you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Well, yes, this is a remarkable development over the last 5 years. I was contacted a number of years ago by a senior investigator at the Southwest Research Institute in Boulder, Colorado. And he's very interested in the formation of our solar system and how it came about, and what is the evidence for how our solar system arose. And some of that evidence is preserved in the fossils of our own solar system, which are called asteroids. And just about a little over 2 weeks from now, NASA will be launching a rocket from Cape Canaveral for a mission that is called the Lucy mission. And the rationale is, just as Lucy has taught us about our origins, this Lucy mission will survey asteroids around the planet Jupiter to see what it can learn from them about the origins of our solar system. And it's an incredibly interesting research project for astronomers and astrophysicists and so on. But it is interesting that, you know, a 3.2 million year old female who lived totally anonymously, obviously, along an ancient African lake, has now inspired a mission like this, at least the use of her name. And it's a deep connection to the past, to the present, and in fact to the future, because this will be a 12-year mission that will visit, I think, a total of 8 asteroids, and send back information to planet Earth. And after that, it will continue flying for probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. So it's a real testament to the abilities, the endless creativeness of the human mind. And that's why I am somewhat optimistic, because we do have the abilities with this brain of ours to do things like this extraordinary mission, or to wrap ourselves around the problems facing us and to come up with solutions to change those devastating challenges that are facing us in the world today.
Well, we just want to thank you so much for your discovery, which has led to a better understanding of our past and now continues to help us learn about our future. And I want to thank you and also thank you for your time today.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed talking about this. I haven't come up with any great solutions, but I hope that the first steps are awareness, understanding, communicating, and realizing who we are. That we have this responsibility, that we're part of the natural world, that we can do something about it, and that we are a species the species that just should get along better to solve these problems.
Okay. We're going to try. We're going to try hard.
Okay.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for your time.